What up, guys? We've been a little busy working on the van here on the side. Hadn't been doing quite as much filming. We had to, still on the insulation process, we had to wait on some more insulation to come in, but in the meantime, been making the side panels and part of all the framing and coverings for the electrical box as well as the water tank box. We can see here the two side panels, just slap some old poly on the outside of them. Here's some of the products we've been using, which we got Minwax pre-stain is a requirement. If you've never stained anything, which myself being new to staining and putting poly on all kind of stuff, but this stuff is night and day. It makes it kindergarten level, difficulty. Trying to apply a stain, which we're using. It's the Early American 230. Just been putting one coat on. It kind of just depends on the type of wood that you're putting it on. We can see on the Baltic birch hardwood, the blonder, more of a white type wood in general, which it makes it have this nice sweet amber beer tone. Got a good iridescence to it, but with the pine 2x4 it's a little bit darker, but yet still very desirable. We get some poly on all of them. And maybe back to the products here. Once we get the pre-stain put on, you apply it. It's very simple. Smear it on, wipe off the excess, wait 20 minutes, and apply stain within 2 hours. We've hit, like I say, just one coat with the Minwax penetrating stain, and then we come back with the clear satin fast drying polyurethane. The brushes, foam pad brushes, definitely make it more of a smooth application process. And with the polyurethane, for sure you want to use a foam brush. Doesn't really matter with the pre-stain and the wood finish. A rag or a staining pad works the best putting down stain. You can basically just pour on as much as you want, let it soak in and wipe off. With that pre-stain, it only penetrates the wood to a certain depth. The pre-stain essentially creates a staining layer within the wood. It makes a barrier for the stain to only penetrate to a certain depth. So it makes it very uniform, and there you don't have any blotching or pattern discoloration. It makes it one even tone. Alright guys, we're going to get some poly slapped on these covering pieces. We got water boxes and battery box covers. Quick do's and don'ts about some poly. Definitely always want to stir it. You always want to do it gently. There's always going to be pretty good layer stuck to the bottom when it settles. So you got to stir it up good. You don't want to shake it and introduce a bunch of bubbles. It's pretty forgiving. Like I say, I'm no expert in applying wood finishes. Pretty much a beginner, which I've given myself a crash course here with doing this stuff as well as YouTube videos, but it's pretty straightforward. Definitely have learned quite a few things. Having the surface prepared is crucial. When you're applying it, you definitely want to have everything laid out, and you want to have your surface ready. You want to have free of dust and debris. You want to have had sanded it at least to 220 is what I've, when you just hit it with 60 and then maybe 120, you can definitely tell a big difference compared to taking it to 220 when you smear it with the brush. Using these foam brushes is pretty crucial too. You want to have it soaked up as much as you can within the brush. I got these off Amazon, and you can get them at Lowe's, but they like them there. And this pack of 12 of them was pretty cheap. I don't remember the price, and this one has been working for a while. The ones I got at Lowe's, which they were cheap too, but it sucked. So this one's been doing quite a good poly work so far and hadn't had to change it out. But like I say, you want to start and get it laid down and then go in one continual motion across the board. You want to take and dip it and have plenty of polyurethane in your applicator. And like I say, you can pretty much use a paintbrush too, but it's going to be streaky. It's not going to hold as much polyurethane as these foam brushes do. And once you want to get it sufficiently saturated, and take and kind of keep the brush in motion, and it won't drip as bad. But as you get started, you come down, let it seep in for a second. As you wipe, you want to apply pressure as you go across the board, which it's always better to work with the grain with anything you're pretty much doing. But when you apply polyurethane, it's a several step process. You have to build it up, and you can't just put it on thick all at once. It smears in, and probably can't see it on the camera, but as you apply each layer, it essentially gets smoother and smoother, but you have to sand it to get it that, which wet sand it too. You don't want to dry sand polyurethane. You want to have a good wet sand to have that moisture absorb and retain the sanding dust. When you dry sand it, that sanding dust essentially piles up in one spot on your sandpaper and then create streaking, which when you sand, you have to go with the grain too. Especially on your prior to your final coat of polyurethane. But you can see, I mean, I'm just get me a good dip, let it soak in for a second. When you start at the beginning, not applying too much pressure, but as you go across the board, your work surface, you apply more to keep an even distribution of the product. If it drips some, it's not too much of an issue, especially on your first coats. It'll smear across. And also one thing though is when you're applying it, you want to start and go in one continual motion. If you miss a spot in here and it streaks a little bit, don't worry about it. You'll get it on your next layer, or you can come back and get it later. But it's pretty much, it's going to turn out better if you just go in one motion and work fluidly, maintaining, you know, one streak all the way across. But when you start and stop, the key thing is just not to start and stop. Just when you lay it down, start going and then go in one streak all the way across. Alright, step 2. When doing the polyurethane process, got us a little bit of water and some fine grit sandpaper. This is 320, which I just super glued it to this here block of plywood, which when you wet sand, anytime you're doing a finish sand, you want to be sure you wet sand it, which wet sanding just prevents residue build up as you're sanding to minimize streaking. So simply pour a little bit of water on here. Make sure you go with the grain. And pretty much the entire point of sanding the polyurethane, you need to sand. You don't have to sand, from what I found, the first layer of application, but I mean, you might as well start somewhere. But essentially, you're sanding all of the dust nibs and just the little residue particles and any imperfection. So when that next coat of poly goes on, it goes on smooth. So you just keep building up the layers of poly, sanding, poly, sanding, until it essentially is a flat, perfect, uniform surface. So, here we go. Alright, as we see here, we got us a mighty dingy looking board. This is the back cover panel for the water tank. But what we got is a result of a wet sanding process on top of the polyurethane. We've already hit it with a wet sand, and now we're gonna make it look good. This is a multi-step process. You gotta sand it to get those little dust nibs out of it. But here we can see, take a mineral spirit soaked rag, wipe all this residue off. First layer came out pretty good. I'm definitely gonna put a little more on. Happy with the product. Okie doke, here for our next trick, adding the second layer of poly. We got Minwax fast drying polyurethane. Want to always be sure to give it a quick stir again, which we have. We got us a fresh brush. These are Bates brushes from Louisiana. They're dang good brushes. I've come with a pack of a bunch of them in it from Amazon, which the last one lasted a good while. It could have kept going, but I think it was only like $10. So we got a bunch of brushes. Might as well start it. Get us a new one. But dip it in here in your product. Get you a good saturation level into your brush. Plenty of poly in there. You know when you get it fully saturated, you can feel the weight, and you got to keep it moving for it so it don't drip out. But here we go. Each layer you go, and as you build up, it just gets more and more satisfying. You can feel the smoothness. First time you put it on, it can kind of look streaky, and it's like, am I doing it right? You sand it and have that surface good and sanded, even from the start, taking it to at least a 220 grit sandpaper. Sand it, sand that first coat of polyurethane, and each progressive coat will just get that much smoother.